London whispers branded him the Heartless Duke, a man treating love like a card game. Yet, the moment she entered the King's Theatre, the brandy glass slipped from his fingers, shattering. The music played on, but for Silas, time froze. Exactly 365 days had passed since he destroyed her. He anticipated tears or fury. Instead, Lady Genevieve looked through him as if he were a ghost. In that terrifying silence, the Duke realized a painful truth. She hadn't merely survived his cruelty. She had ascended beyond it. This was not a reunion. It was his cold reckoning. London, October 1814, the King's Theatre, Haymarket. The air in the King's Theatre was thick with the scent of beeswax, expensive perfume, and the damp wool of coats drying from the autumn rain. It was the height of the season, and the horseshoe-shaped auditorium was packed. In the pit, the dandies preened. In the gallery, the commoners shouted. But in the private boxes, the aristocracy waged their silent, deadly wars of reputation. Silas Sterling, the Duke of Kexley, sat in the shadows of Box 4, bored out of his mind. At 32, Silas was the envy of half the men in London and the desire of every mother with a marriageable daughter. He was wealthy, possessing estates that stretched from Derbyshire to the Kentish coast, and he was undeniably handsome in a sharp, dangerous way. Dark hair, eyes the colour of a stormy sea, and a jawline that seemed carved from granite, but tonight he felt nothing but a hollow ache he refused to name. "You're brooding again, Kexley," drawled Lord Hugo, his cousin, leaning back in his chair with a smirk. "The soprano is hitting a high C, and you look as though you're at a funeral." "I'm not brooding," Silas snapped, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "I'm merely contemplating leaving early. The air in here is stifling." "It's not the air," Hugo laughed softly. "It's the anniversary, isn't it? 1 year since—" "Don't," Silas warned, his voice low and lethal. "Very well, but look there." Hugo pointed his chin toward the box directly across from them, one that had been empty for the first 2 acts. "Someone has finally arrived in the Earl of Marwood's box, and I believe the entire theatre has noticed." Silas glanced up indifferently. Then he froze. The door to the opposite box had opened, and a woman stepped into the flickering gaslight. She was not wearing the pale pastels or white muslins that were fashionable among debutantes that year. She was dressed in deep, midnight blue velvet, cut daringly low across the shoulders, shimmering like the night sky. It was her, Lady Genevieve Laurent. Silas felt the blood drain from his face. For a year, he had looked for her in every crowd, every ballroom, every park in London, only to be told she had fled to the continent. But this was not the Genevieve he remembered. The girl he had courted was shy, blushing at the slightest compliment, her eyes always cast down, hiding behind a fan. This woman stood tall, her chin lifted. She moved to the front of the box with the grace of a queen claiming her throne. She adjusted her opera glasses, her movements slow, deliberate, and utterly composed. "My God," Hugo whispered, his smirk vanishing. "She's magnificent." The murmur started in the pit and rose to the boxes. "Is that her? Is that the girl who ran away?" Silas couldn't breathe. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He needed her to look at him. He needed to see if there was any spark of the old warmth, any hint of the love that had once made him feel invincible. As if sensing his gaze, Genevieve slowly lowered her opera glasses. She turned her head across the vast, candlelit expanse of the theatre. Their eyes met. Silas half rose from his seat, his hand gripping the velvet railing. He waited for the flinch. He waited for the hurt. But Genevieve's face remained a mask of porcelain perfection. She looked at him, not with hatred, but with a chilling indifference, as if he were a stranger, as if he were a piece of furniture. She held his gaze for 3 agonizing seconds, then turned away, dismissing him entirely to speak to the man who had just stepped out of the shadows behind her. Silas fell back into his chair, stunned. The glass in his hand slipped, crashing to the floor. The sound was swallowed by the orchestra, but the shattering inside his chest was deafening. "Who is that with her?" Silas demanded, his voice trembling with a rage he hadn't felt in years. Hugo leaned forward, squinting. "Well, this is a twist. That cousin appears to be the French financier, Monsieur Valmont, the richest man in Paris." Silas clenched his jaw until it ached. She wasn't just back, she was armed. 1 year earlier, November 1813, to understand the silence in the theatre, one had to understand the noise at White's Club on a snowy night in 1813. White's on St. James's Street was the inner sanctum of the British aristocracy. It was a place of leather armchairs, cigar smoke, and ruinous gambling. The famous betting book at White's was legendary. Men bet on everything from which politician would die first to how long a man could hold his breath. Silas had been different then, arrogant, untouchable, and reckless. He had just inherited his dukedom and felt the weight of the world, which he tried to shrug off with debauchery. It was Lord Archibald Pym who started it. Pym was a snake of a man, envious of Silas's title and charm. "They say the new girl, the Earl of Marwood's niece, is impossible to charm," Pym had sneered over a game of cards. Lady Genevieve, a vicar's daughter raised in a convent, practically. She freezes every man who speaks to her. They call her the little nun. "She's not a nun," Silas had said, lazily, checking his cards. "She's just intelligent. She knows you lot are wolves." "I bet you couldn't turn her head, Kexley," Pym challenged, his eyes gleaming. "I bet you 5,000 guineas you can't get her to profess her love for you before the frost fair on the Thames." Silas should have walked away. He knew he should have. But the brandy was warm, the room was watching, and his pride was a fragile thing. "Done," Silas said, calling for the betting book. He wrote the entry himself, his handwriting sweeping and bold. "The Duke of Kexley wagers 5,000 guineas that he will win the heart of Lady Genevieve Laurent before the ice melts." It started as a game. He sent flowers. He arranged accidental meetings in Hyde Park. He used every trick in his arsenal. But then, something terrifying happened. He actually listened to her. He found that behind her shy exterior was a wicked sense of humor. He found that she loved astronomy and could name every constellation. He found that when she laughed, he didn't want to be anywhere else. By Christmas, Silas Sterling was no longer playing a game. He was desperately, hopelessly in love. He planned to propose. He planned to go to White's, strike the wager from the book, pay the debt, and never speak of it again. He wanted to start clean. But secrets in London are like ink in water. They spread. It was the night of the Epiphany Ball. Silas had led Genevieve into the conservatory. The air was cold, but her hands were warm in his. "Genevieve," he had started, his voice thick with emotion. "There is something I must tell you. Something terrible, but—" "Silas," she interrupted, her eyes shining with a trust that broke his heart. "You don't need to say anything. I know who you are. I know your heart." She kissed him then, a soft, tentative press of lips that sealed his fate. He decided he would fix the book tomorrow morning. Tonight, he would just be hers. He left her in the conservatory to fetch them punch. When he returned, the room was silent. Lord Pym was standing there, and in his hand he held a page torn, violently, from the betting book of White's Club. Genevieve was reading it. Silas froze. "Evie." She looked up. The colour had vanished from her face. She looked at the paper, then at him. The paper trembled in her hand. "Is this true?" she whispered. Her voice wasn't angry, it was shattered. Was it all for guineas? The walk by the Serpentine, the poetry, the way you looked at me? No. Silas stepped forward, reaching for her. "Evie, it started that way, but I swear—" "Don't." She stepped back, tripping over her hem. "Don't come near me. I was going to cancel it. I love you. You bet on me," she said, a tear finally escaping, tracking hot and fast down her cheek. "You bet on my heart like I was a horse at Tattersall's. Evie, please." She crumpled the paper and threw it at his chest. It hit him with the force of a bullet. "My name is Lady Genevieve," she said, her voice shaking but gaining strength. "And you have won your wager, Your Grace. I did love you, but I will never, ever forgive you." She turned and ran into the snowy night. Silas chased her to the carriage, but the door slammed in his face. The horses thundered away, leaving him standing in the snow, clutching the crumpled paper, the winner of 5,000 guineas and the loser of the only thing that mattered. 2 days later, she was gone. She had left for France with her aunt, and now, 1 year later, she was back, and the ice Silas had tried to melt was nothing compared to the glacier she had become. October 1814. 2 days after the opera, Silas could not sleep. The image of Genevieve in that blue dress haunted him. He spent the next 2 days pacing his study in his townhouse on Grosvenor Square, ignoring the stacks of invitations on his desk. He needed to speak to her. He needed to explain that he had suffered every day of the last year. He found out through his valet that she was staying at the Claridge House, a modest but respectable residence in Mayfair, not her uncle's grand estate. This was curious. Why was she independent? Unable to wait any longer, Silas rode to Claridge House. He didn't care about propriety. He pounded on the door until a startled butler answered. "I am here to see Lady Genevieve," Silas barked. "Her ladyship is not receiving callers, Your Grace," the butler said nervously. "She will receive me." Silas pushed past him. He stormed into the drawing room and stopped dead. Genevieve was there, sitting by the window. She was not alone. The French financier, Monsieur Valmont, was sitting opposite her, holding a stack of documents. They looked like business partners, not lovers. Genevieve looked up, her expression unreadable. "It is rude to barge in, Your Grace." "We need to talk," Silas said, ignoring Valmont. "Alone." Genevieve sighed, closing a ledger she was holding. She nodded to Valmont. "Henri, give us a moment, please." Valmont stood, bowed to Silas with a mocking smile, and left the room. "You have 5 minutes," Genevieve said, standing up. She didn't offer him a seat. She didn't offer him tea. She stood with her hands clasped in front of her, a wall of composure. "Evie." "Lady Genevieve," she corrected. "Genevieve," Silas breathed, stepping closer. "I know I have no right to ask for your time. I know what I did was unforgivable. But I had to see you. I had to know if you are happy." "Happy?" She let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Happiness is a trivial thing, Silas. I am content. I am independent. And I am busy." "I heard you were in Paris," Silas said, searching her face for a crack in the armor. "I wrote to you. Dozens of letters. Did you read them?" "I burned them," she said simply. "Unopened." The word struck him like a physical blow. "Why have you returned?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Because London is the financial capital of the world, and I have business here." She walked to the fireplace, turning her back to him. "And because I was tired of running. I realized that if I stayed away, I was letting you win. I was letting you be the reason for my exile. I am done letting you dictate my life." "I never wanted to dictate your life," Silas pleaded. "I wanted to share it. That wager, I tried to stop it. I fell in love with you, Genevieve. You have to believe that." She turned around, and for a second, her eyes flashed with genuine fire. "Believe you? The man who laughed about me in a club with Archibald Pym? The man who put a price on my soul?" She took a step toward him, her voice dropping to a hiss. "You didn't break my heart, Silas. You humiliated me. You made me a joke. Do you know what they called me when I left? The 5,000 guinea girl." Silas flinched. He hadn't known that. "I am sorry," he whispered. "I would give everything I own to take it back." "Keep your money," she said coldly. "I have my own now." "What do you mean?" "Monsieur Valmont is not my lover, Silas. He is my mentor. When I got to Paris, I didn't cry. I invested. I took the small inheritance my mother left me, and I learned the trade. I own ships, Silas. I own debts. I am not the vicar's niece anymore. I am a woman of means." Silas stared at her. This was the twist he hadn't seen coming. She hadn't just survived. She had thrived in a man's world. "Then why did you come back to London, really?" Silas asked, sensing there was more. "If you are so successful in Paris, why risk the scandal here?" Genevieve's eyes went dark. "Because there is one debt left unpaid in London, and I intend to collect it." "What debt?" "That is none of your concern. Now, your 5 minutes are up. Get out." Silas stood his ground for a moment, wanting to grab her, to shake her, to kiss her. But the look in her eyes stopped him. It wasn't hatred. It was dismissal. He turned and walked to the door. Hand on the latch, he paused. "I won't give up," he said quietly. "I will earn your forgiveness, Genevieve, even if it takes a lifetime." "You don't have a lifetime, Silas," she said, her voice drifting across the room like smoke. "You have no idea what is coming." Silas left the house, his mind racing. What is coming? As he stepped onto the street, he saw Lord Pym walking on the other side of the road, tipping his hat to Genevieve's window. Silas felt a cold chill settle in his bones. Pym and Genevieve? It was impossible. Unless the debt she came to collect wasn't money. Unless it was revenge. London, November 1814. The rain in London had turned the cobblestones into sleek black mirrors reflecting the gaslights, but inside the gilded halls of the Duchess of Somerset's ball, the world was nothing but warmth, light, and vicious whispers. Silas stood at the edge of the ballroom, a glass of champagne untouched in his hand. He wasn't watching the dancers. He was watching the door. In the week since his confrontation with Genevieve at Claridge House, Silas had done something he had never done before. He had investigated a woman. He had gone to his solicitors, to his bankers, and even to the shadowy brokers who operated in the back rooms of coffee-houses in the city. What he found had terrified him. Genevieve hadn't just made money in France. She had weaponized it. Under the guise of Monsieur Valmont's firm, she had been systematically buying up the debts of specific English aristocrats. High-interest loans, mortgages on crumbling estates, gambling vouchers signed in moments of desperation. She bought them all. And the man whose name appeared most frequently in her ledger was Lord Archibald Pym. "She's going to gut him," Hugo whispered, appearing at Silas's elbow. "I heard she bought the mortgage on Pym's ancestral seat in Sussex yesterday. If she calls in the debt, Pym is a pauper." "She isn't just going to gut him," Silas murmured, his eyes narrowing as the ballroom doors opened. "She's going to flay him alive in front of the Tun." And there she was. Lady Genevieve made an entrance that silenced the orchestra. She wore a gown of crimson silk, the colour of blood and wine, cut in the French style, which was sharper and more structured than the flowing English muslins. Around her neck sat a necklace of garnets, so dark they looked like drops of ink. She didn't look like a vicar's niece. She looked like Nemesis. She moved through the crowd, Monsieur Valmont trailing a step behind her, like a loyal guard dog. Silas watched as she stopped to speak to the Duke of York. The royal duke laughed at something she said, a rare feat. She was charming the power players, isolating her prey. Silas saw Lord Pym across the room. The man looked ill. His skin was pasty, sweat beading on his upper lip. Pym knew. He had to know who held his leash now. Silas couldn't stand on the sidelines any longer. He set his glass down on a passing tray and cut a path through the crowd. He didn't care about the whispers. He didn't care about the scandal. He had to warn her. Pym was a rat, and cornered rats bit. He intercepted her just as the orchestra struck up. A waltz. "Lady Genevieve," Silas said, bowing low, blocking her path. "May I have this dance?" The circle of people around them went quiet. The air crackled with tension. Everyone remembered the wager. Everyone remembered the girl running into the snow. Genevieve looked at his outstretched hand. Her eyes were cold, calculating. To refuse a duke publicly would be a breach of etiquette that could hurt her, standing with the old guard she was trying to charm. "Your Grace," she said, her voice smooth as glass, "I believe your card is full." "For you, I would clear the slate," Silas said, his voice dropping an octave. "Please, we need to speak. It's about Pym." At the mention of the name, her eyes flickered. She gave a stiff nod. "Very well." She placed her hand in his. Even through her silk glove, the touch sent a shockwave up Silas's arm. He led her to the floor. As his hand settled on her waist, firm, possessive, yet terrified he might break her, they began to turn. "You look dangerous tonight, Genevieve," Silas murmured as they spun. "I am dangerous, Silas. You would do well to remember that." "I know what you are doing," he whispered, pulling her slightly closer than propriety allowed so he wouldn't be overheard. "I know you bought Pym's debts. I know you own him." "He owns nothing," she corrected, her gaze fixed over his shoulder. "He lives in my house. He rides my horses. He spends my money. I am simply preparing to foreclose. He is dangerous, Evie. Pym has nothing left to lose. Men like that do desperate things." "Let him try," she scoffed. "He destroyed my reputation for 5,000 guineas. I will take his for free." "Is that what this is? Revenge?" Silas searched her face, looking for the soft girl he had loved. "Does it make you happy?" Holding the axe. "It's not about happiness," she hissed, her composure slipping for the first time. "It's about justice. You and your friends treated me like cattle. You bet on my heart. You laughed. Do you know how hard it is to rebuild a life when your name is a punchline in every club in London?" "I never laughed," Silas said fiercely. "I died, Genevieve. The day you left, the Silas you knew died. I haven't touched a card in a year. I haven't looked at another woman. I have spent every day regretting the moment I let Pym goad me." "And yet," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "you were the one who wrote the wager. Pym suggested it, but you wrote it. Before the ice melts." "I was a fool," Silas admitted, his voice cracking. "But I fell in love with you. Real love. The kind that burns you down to the foundation. I wanted to marry you, Evie. I still do." Genevieve stiffened in his arms. She missed a step, her boot coming down on his, but she recovered instantly. She looked up at him, her dark eyes wide. For a second, just a second, the anger vanished, replaced by a profound sadness. "Do not speak to me of marriage," she whispered. You forfeited that right. I will earn it back. You cannot earn back trust that has been pulverized, Silas. The music swelled to a crescendo. They spun faster. The world blurred around them. The candlelight, the jewels, the staring faces. It was just the two of them, locked in a battle of wills that felt terrifyingly like passion. "Warning Pym is not your concern," she said, pulling back as the music ended. "Stay out of my way, your grace. When the blow falls, I do not want you in the blast radius." She curtsied, a sharp dismissal movement, and walked away. Silas stood on the dance floor, chest heaving. He watched her go. She was walking straight toward the balcony doors, and following her, slipping a knife from his coat pocket into his sleeve, was Lord Archibald Pym. Silas didn't think. He ran. The same night. Genevieve needed air. The waltz with Silas had rattled her more than she cared to admit. His hand on her waist had felt too familiar, too right. It made her angry. She had spent a year building walls of ice around her heart, and he had managed to chip one with a single dance. She stepped out onto the terrace. The cold November air bit at her skin, but it felt good against the flush of her cheeks. "Enjoying the triumph, my dear?" The voice was slurred, oily. Genevieve spun around. Lord Pym stood there, blocking the door back to the ballroom. He looked deranged. His cravat was undone, his hair wild. He smelled of cheap gin and desperation. "Lord Pym," Genevieve said, lifting her chin. "You are drunk. Move." "You think you're so clever," Pym sneered, stepping closer. "The little nun. The vicar's mouse. You think you can walk into my world and take everything." "I took nothing that wasn't sold to me," Genevieve said coldly. "You borrowed money you couldn't pay back. You gambled away your inheritance. I merely purchased the paper." "You're going to give it back," Pym growled. He pulled a small pistol from his coat. It was a crude thing, a dueling pistol, but at this range it was lethal. Genevieve froze. She looked at the gun, then at his shaking hand. She wasn't screaming. She was calculating the distance. "Shoot me," she said calmly, "and you hang. There are 200 witnesses inside." "I'm ruined anyway," Pym shouted, the gun wavering. "You're evicting me tomorrow. I have nothing. But if you sign the deed over, if you write a note forgiving the debt—" "I would sooner die," she spat. Pym's face twisted in rage. He cocked the hammer. "Then die, you bit." Crash! The glass door of the terrace shattered outward as a body collided with Pym. Silas. He had thrown himself through the French doors, tackling Pym to the stone ground. The pistol skittered across the terrace, discharging with a deafening bang into the night sky. Genevieve stumbled back, hand to her mouth. Silas and Pym rolled on the ground, a tangle of limbs and velvet. Pym was desperate, clawing at Silas's eyes, but Silas was younger, stronger, and fueled by a year of repressed fury. Silas pinned Pym to the stones, his forearm pressed against the older man's throat. "Enough!" Silas roared. "It is over, Archibald!" Pym gasped for air, his face turning purple. Silas held him there, breathing hard, his knuckles white. Guests began to pour onto the terrace, screaming at the sight of the two aristocrats brawling on the floor. Silas stood up, dragging Pym with him by the collar. He shoved the ruined man toward two footmen who had rushed forward. "Take him," Silas commanded, his voice shaking with adrenaline. "He just attempted to murder Lady Genevieve. Hold him for the magistrate." Silas turned to Genevieve. She was standing by the stone railing, trembling. Not from fear, Silas realized, but from shock. He walked over to her, ignoring the blood dripping from a cut on his cheek where the glass had grazed him. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, scanning her for injuries. "Did he touch you?" Genevieve looked at the blood on his face. She reached out, her hand hovering inches from his cheek before she pulled it back. You You jumped through a window, she whispered. I saw him following you, Silas said, his chest heaving. I told you he was dangerous. I could have handled him, she said, though her voice lacked its usual steel. No, Evie, Silas said softly. You can handle money. You can handle gossip. You cannot handle a bullet. You have to stop fighting the world alone. She looked at him, really looked at him. The man who had ruined her life had just saved it. The narrative she had told herself for a year, that he was a villain, a monster, was cracking. A monster doesn't bleed for you. Your Grace, Monsieur Valmont appeared, looking horrified. The carriage is ready. We must go. The scandal. Genevieve nodded, composing herself. She looked back at Silas. Thank you, she said stiffly, for saving my life. I am in your debt. I don't want your debt, Silas said. I want to know you're safe. I am leaving, she said. Good night, Silas. She turned and fled, Valmont shielding her from the prying eyes of the crowd. Silas watched her go, touching the cut on his cheek. He felt alive for the first time in a year. She hadn't forgiven him. No. But she had called him Silas. The next morning. The scandal sheets were vicious, but for once they were on Silas's side. Duke defends lady's honor from deranged debtor, was the headline. Pym was in custody. His reputation was annihilated. Genevieve's revenge was complete, though not in the way she had planned. But the war wasn't over. Silas was sitting at breakfast when a courier arrived with a package. It was wrapped in brown paper, heavy and smelling of tobacco. Silas opened it. Inside lay a stack of documents, old yellowing parchments, the deeds to the Kexley estates in Derbyshire, the mortgage on his London townhouse, and a note written in elegant, sharp script. Your Grace, in the process of acquiring Lord Pym's debts, I acquired a bundle of loans from the Bank of England. It appears your father leveraged the Kexley estate heavily before he died. These notes were part of the package. Technically, Silas, I now own your house. I own your land. I own the roof over your head. You saved my life last night. Consider this the repayment of that debt. I will not foreclose on you. But know this. I hold your future in my hands, just as you once held my heart. Do not cross me again. G. Silas stared at the papers. He laughed, a loud, incredulous laugh that echoed through the empty dining room. He hadn't known his father left debts. But that wasn't why he was laughing. He was laughing because she had him. She had checkmated him. She owned him, financially and emotionally. Well played, Evie, he whispered, tracing her signature. Well played. But Silas knew something Genevieve didn't. He didn't care about the money. The fact that she held his debt meant they were tied together. She couldn't ignore him now. She was his creditor, and that meant he had a reason to see her every single day. He stood up and rang the bell. Prepare my horse, he told the footman. I have a business meeting with my landlord. London, December 1841. The office of Monsieur Valmont. The winter deepened, turning London into a landscape of charcoal and chalk. The fog was so thick on the morning Silas arrived at the offices of Valmont and Laurent that the gas lamps were still lit at noon. He was not there to beg. He was there to negotiate. Silas walked into the office, a bustling suite of rooms near the Bank of England. Clerks scurried back and forth with stacks of paper. It was a world of commerce, a world the aristocracy usually pretended didn't exist while secretly relying on it. Your Grace, Monsieur Valmont greeted him, stepping out of a private office. The Frenchman looked tired, wiping his spectacles with a silk handkerchief. Lady Genevieve is not expecting you. I am here to discuss the terms of my mortgage, Silas said, placing his hat on the rack. As her debtor, I have the right to a meeting. Valmont studied him for a long moment, his eyes shrewd. "You are a persistent man, Duke Kexley. Most men would have fled to the country in shame to find out a woman holds the deed to their ancestral home." "I am not most men," Silas said quietly, "and she is not most women." Valmont sighed, a heavy, weary sound. "She is in the back room. But before you go in, there is something you should know. Something she will never tell you because her pride is as thick as the walls of Newgate Prison." Silas stiffened. "What is it?" "When we acquired the bundle of debts from the bank," Valmont said, lowering his voice, "we did not know your father's notes were included. It was a blind purchase." "I assumed as much," Silas nodded. "But," Valmont raised a finger, 3 weeks ago, Lord Pym, before his arrest, discovered we held your mortgage. He came to us. He offered Genevieve double the value of the notes. He wanted to buy your debt so he could foreclose on you immediately. He wanted to throw you and your mother into the street." Silas felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Pym had tried to destroy him financially before he tried to kill Genevieve physically. "And?" Silas asked, his voice tight. "And Genevieve refused," Valmont said softly. "She told him that the Kexley debt was not for sale at any price. She lost a fortune by refusing his offer, Silas. She kept the debt, not to control you, but to ensure that no one else could hurt you." The realization hit Silas like a physical blow. She had protected him. Even while she claimed to hate him, even while she froze him out at the opera and the ball, she had shielded him from ruin. "Why didn't she tell me?" Silas whispered. "Because," Valmont smiled sadly, "if she admitted she protected you, she would have to admit she still cares. And that terrifies her more than any pistol." Silas nodded, a newfound determination settling in his chest. He didn't just love her. He respected her more than anyone he had ever known. He walked past Valmont and opened the heavy oak door to her private sanctuary. Genevieve was standing by a large map of the Atlantic trade routes, pinning flags to various ports. She looked up, startled, as Silas entered and closed the door behind him. "I didn't hear you knock," she said sharply, though her hand trembled slightly as she reached for a ledger. "I know about Pym's offer," Silas said. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He walked straight to the desk, placing his hands on the polished wood, leaning in. Genevieve froze. Her eyes darted to the door, then back to him. "Henri talks too much." "He told me you refused double the value," Silas said, his voice rough with emotion. "You could have ruined me, Evie. You could have sold me to Pym and watched me fall. Why didn't you?" "It was a bad business decision," she lied, turning away to fiddle with an inkwell. "Pym's credit was shaky. I didn't trust his promissory notes." "Liar," Silas breathed. He walked around the desk. She backed up until she hit the bookshelf. There was nowhere left to run. "Admit it," Silas said, stopping inches from her. He didn't touch her, but the heat between them was palpable. "You saved me." "I own you," she flared, her eyes flashing with tears she refused to shed. "There is a difference." "Then foreclose," Silas challenged her. "If you hate me, if I am just a bad investment, take the house. Take the land. Do it now." "I can't." "Why?" "Because I cannot bear the thought of you suffering," she cried out, the truth finally tearing its way out of her throat. Silence slammed into the room. Genevieve gasped, covering her mouth with her hand, horrified by her own confession. Silas reached out then, slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he took her hands in his. They were cold, but his were warm. "You loved me once," he whispered. "You loved me enough to protect me when I didn't deserve it. "Genevieve, look at me." She looked up, the tears finally spilling over. "I never stopped," she whispered, her voice broken. "I went to Paris. I built a fortune. I became a woman of ice and steel. But every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that conservatory. I was back to the moment before I saw the paper. I hate you for that, Silas. I hate you for making me love you so much that I couldn't even enjoy my revenge." "I don't want you to enjoy revenge," Silas said, lifting her hand to his lips, kissing the pulse point of her wrist. "I want you to enjoy life. I want you to enjoy us." "There is no us." She shook her head, though she didn't pull her hand away. "The world knows what you did. The wager—" "To hell with the world," Silas said fiercely. "Let them talk. Let them whisper. I will spend every day of the rest of my life proving them wrong. I will rewrite every entry in that betting book if I have to." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was the deed to his house, the document she had sent him. "You sent this to me to remind me of my debt," Silas said. He walked over to the fireplace, where a low fire was burning in the grate. "Silas, what are you doing?" Genevieve stepped forward. Silas tossed the deed into the fire. Genevieve gasped. "That is your mortgage. That is £50,000. "I don't care," Silas said, watching the paper curl and blacken, the wax seal melting into nothing. "I don't want there to be a debt between us. I don't want you to own my house, Evie. I want you to share it." He turned back to her, the flames casting dancing shadows across his face. "I am not asking for your forgiveness today," he said. "I am asking for a chance to court you. Properly. No wagers, no games, just a man, stripping himself of his pride, asking the woman he loves to go for a walk." Genevieve looked at the fire, then at him. The symbol of her power over him was ash. He had voluntarily made himself vulnerable again. He had leveled the playing field. A small, hesitant smile touched her lips, the first genuine smile he had seen in a year. "A walk?" she asked softly. "In this weather?" "I hear," Silas smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners, "that the Thames has frozen over. They are setting up a fair on the ice. I would very much like to take you." London, February 1814, the Frost Fair on the River Thames. The winter of 1814 was not merely cold. It was a phenomenon, a freeze so profound that it halted the heartbeat of London and turned the River Thames into a solid, unmoving highway of white. It was a sight that happened only once in a generation, a miracle of nature that the city had embraced with a carnival madness. Where merchant ships usually cut through dark water, a temporary city had sprung up. Tents of striped canvas fluttered in the biting wind, roasting oxen turned on great iron spits over open fires built directly on the ice, and the air was thick with the scent of wood smoke, roasted chestnuts, and gin. Silas and Genevieve walked arm in arm through this city of ice, navigating the labyrinth of vendors and performers. The ground beneath their feet was hard and slick, a reminder that they were walking on water, a feat that felt as impossible as the reconciliation happening between them. Genevieve wore a pelisse of heavy velvet, trimmed with silver fox fur, her face framed by a matching bonnet. The cold had painted a flush of roses onto her cheeks, making her eyes shine with a brilliance that rivaled the winter stars. She held Silas's arm tightly. In the past, such a grip might have been for balance, a lady relying on a gentleman. Today, it was an anchor. She held him as if to assure herself he was real, that he wouldn't vanish into the fog like a phantom of her past. It had been 2 months since the night of the fire in her office, 2 months of a courtship that bore no resemblance to the flirtatious games of the season. There had been no grand balls, no performative waltzes for the benefit of the gossip columns. Instead, there had been quiet mornings in the library of Claridge House, where Silas read aloud while she worked on her ledgers. There had been heated debates about trade tariffs and the price of grain, where Genevieve found, to her shock, that the Duke possessed a sharp, logistical mind he had wasted for years at card tables. They had learned to be partners. They had learned to be friends. But the shadow of the past still lingered, stretching long and thin over their fragile peace. The words of that accursed wager still echoed in the back of Silas's mind, ticking like a clock. Before the ice melts. The prophecy of the wager had come true in the most literal sense. The ice was here. The Thames was frozen. The deadline was now. They wandered away from the raucous noise of the Friesland Street, the main thoroughfare of the fair, where printing presses churned out commemorative tickets and fiddlers played wild jigs. They moved toward Blackfriars Bridge, where the crowd thinned and the noise faded into a dull, rhythmic hum. The sun was beginning to set, bleeding a bruised purple and burnt orange across the horizon. The light caught the dome of St. Paul's Cathedral in the distance, turning the cross atop it into a beacon of gold. "It is otherworldly," Genevieve whispered, her breath misting in the freezing air. She stopped, looking down at the opaque surface beneath her boots. To think, a few months ago, this was a dark, rushing current. Now it is solid ground. It feels impossible. "Miracles happen, Evie," Silas said softly, turning his gaze from the horizon to her face. "I am standing next to one." Genevieve laughed, a bright, clear sound that warmed him more than the hot brandy they had purchased earlier. "You have become a poet, Your Grace. It is a dangerous development." "I have not become a poet," Silas corrected, his voice dropping to a serious, resonant timbre. "I have simply become a man who knows exactly what he almost lost. And I see the world clearly now." He stopped walking, and because her arm was linked with his, she stopped too. They stood in the shadow of the great bridge, the wind whipping around them, carrying the faint sound of a violin. "Evie," he started, turning to face her fully. He took both of her gloved hands in his, feeling the smallness of them within his own. "Do you remember the wager? The specific wording Pym used?" Genevieve's smile faltered. The light in her eyes dimmed slightly, a defensive wall instantly rising. She tried to pull her hands away, but he held them firm, not trapping her, but grounding her. "Silas, please, we have had such a lovely day. Do not ruin it with ghosts." "I must," he insisted, though his voice was gentle. "I need to say it. The wager was that I would win your heart before the ice melts." He looked down significantly at the frozen river beneath their feet. "The ice is here, Genevieve. The condition is met." "Is that why you brought me here?" she asked, her voice trembling with a sudden, sharp hurt. "To show me that you won? That you fulfilled the terms?" "No," Silas said firmly. "I brought you here to tell you that I realized something today. I realized that the premise of the wager was flawed from the very beginning. I do not want to win your heart, Genevieve. I never did. Because winning implies it is a prize to be taken, a trophy to be mounted on a wall alongside a fox or a stag." He released her hands and reached into the inner pocket of his heavy wool coat. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic rhythm that defied his calm exterior. "Your heart is not a trophy," he continued, his grey eyes searching hers. "It is a gift that must be given freely, or not at all. And it is a gift I am terrified I do not deserve." He pulled out a small velvet box. He didn't open it immediately. He looked at it, then back at her. "I am not betting on us, Evie. I am done with chance. I am done with luck. Silas took a step back and, ignoring the cold, wet bite of the ice, dropped to one knee. A hush seemed to ripple outward from them. A group of skaters nearby slowed and stopped. A vendor paused in his shouting. The sight of a duke, unmistakable in his bearing and dress, kneeling on the frozen Thames, was a spectacle greater than any puppet show. Silas snapped the box open. Inside lay a ring that defied convention. It was not a diamond solitaire, cold and white. It was a sapphire, dark and deep as the midnight sky over the Atlantic, flanked by a halo of blood-red garnets. Genevieve gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "I had this made," Silas said, his hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "The sapphire is for the night I saw you at the opera. The night you wore blue velvet and looked at me with such indifference that it shattered my soul. It reminds me of the darkness I had to walk through to find you again." He traced the red stones with his eyes. "And the garnets, they are for the fire of your anger, the fire of your resilience, and the fire in the hearth where you burned my debt and saved my future." Genevieve stared at the ring, tears blurring her vision. The colors swam together, blue and red, sorrow and passion, ice and fire. "Silas," she choked out, unable to form a complete sentence. "I am promising," Silas said, his voice ringing out clear and true across the ice, loud enough for the gathering witnesses to hear. "I promise to honor you, not as a possession, but as my superior in spirit. I promise to listen to you, even when the truth is painful. I promise that you will never be a conquest, only my equal, my partner, my love." He looked up, his face open, vulnerable, stripped of all the arrogance that had once defined the Duke of Kexley. "Lady Genevieve Laurent, will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Will you let me spend the rest of my life making up for one foolish year?" Genevieve looked down at him. In her mind, she saw the flashes of the past year, the humiliation of the betting book, the loneliness of Paris, the cold calculation of her revenge. But then she looked at the man kneeling before her. She saw the cut on his cheek from the night he saved her life. She saw the ink stains on his fingers from helping her with her ledgers. She realized she was tired of holding on to the winter. She didn't want to be the woman who exacted revenge anymore. She wanted to be the woman who was loved. "The ice will melt, Silas," she whispered, a single tear escaping to slide down her cold cheek. "The river will break apart. The spring will come." "Let it melt," Silas said, his gaze intense and unwavering. "Let the river run wild. My love won't melt. It is the only solid thing I have." Genevieve slowly pulled the glove from her left hand. The cold air bit at her skin, but she didn't feel it. She reached down and touched his face, her thumb tracing the high arch of his cheekbone, feeling the warmth of his skin against her frozen fingertips. "Yes," she said, her voice gaining strength, projecting her joy to the grey sky. "Yes, Silas. I will." Silas let out a breath he felt he had been holding for 14 months. He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, the dark stones catching the dying light of the sun. He stood up and pulled her into his arms, burying his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling the scent of her perfume and the winter air. As their lips met, the crowd on the ice erupted. It wasn't the polite applause of a ballroom. It was the raucous, genuine cheering of Londoners who loved a good ending. Fiddlers nearby struck up a joyous, stamping tune. But Silas and Genevieve didn't hear them. They were lost in the warmth of each other. Two people who had navigated a sea of pride and pain to find solid ground. The wager was forgotten, dissolved into history. The debts were paid in full, and as the first snowflakes of the evening began to fall, drifting gently around them like confetti, the Duke and his Duchess began the only story that truly mattered, the one they would write together on pages that had no price. And that is the story of the Heartless Duke and the woman who taught him how to feel. It's a reminder that while revenge might be sweet, forgiveness is the only thing that can truly heal a broken heart. Silas and Genevieve proved that love isn't a game to be won. It's a partnership to be built, even if you have to build it on thin ice. If this story moved you, or if you've ever had to forgive someone you loved, please give this video a like. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share this with a friend who loves a good historical romance, and hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss a story. We have plenty more tales of scandal, romance, and redemption coming your way. Thanks for listening.